Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about hair and marabou and other materials that can generate a lot of bites for you. In my opinion, when you start talking about jigs and materials to use, different materials that you see going on to hair jigs and marabou jigs and different types of jigs are some of the most lifelike, best materials that you can use, but are very rarely utilized by fishing manufacturers. And the reason for that is they're very expensive materials. They're very expensive to tie. They take a long time to make and to tie. And it's hard for tackle companies to produce them at a price point that makes sense to the consumers. And what I mean by that is when you go into a store and you see, some of these various different bucktail jigs and hair jigs that are all tied up, a lot of times the price on them can be a little bit outlandish. A lot of anglers will look at them and see a hand tied jig that could be $20 in the store. But what they don't realize is the materials that go into this are expensive in themselves, but the labor is really what it comes down to. To tie a good jig takes a long time. And I know that because I tie a lot of my own marabou jigs, and they are a pain in the butt. Not that I can't sit down and produce a bunch, but they're messy, they're dirty. You go through a lot of material. They take a while to tie, especially if you're looking to produce them at a mass production level. So from that standpoint, they're hard to find. There aren't that many companies that make hair jigs of the various different designs out there. A lot of them tend to be made by customizing shops, people that are little garage shops, people out there that are willing to tie them while they watch TV. They produce a handful here, they produce a handful there, and when they're sold out, they're sold out. That doesn't work so well for a larger tackle company, meaning, if they're going to have a product out there, they can't really afford to sit on a product and only make a few hundred of them throughout the course of the year. That doesn't really make sense for them to have them as a SKU in their lineup. So you see a lot of these companies that tend to not produce them. Now, having said all of this, I would argue that these materials and these types of designs are the best designs out there. And they catch more fish than a lot of our other various synthetic materials, like a silicone skirt. They just tend to be much more difficult to produce. So let's just talk a little bit about hair jigs and marabou jigs in general, because to me, they fall into the same category. Completely different material, but very similar. So if you're talking about a marabou jig, there are a few that you can buy for the smallmouth world, like this guy. This is the VMC. It's the Dominator jig, I think is what it's actually called. Does it say it anywhere on here? The Dominator marabou jig. Really good jig. It's just a good quality smallmouth bait. But when you look at all the different species out there, let's look at crappie. One of the best baits you can throw for crappie are marabou jigs, little marabou jigs. They've been around for I don't know how long, about as long as jigs have been made. There have been marabou jigs that have been made for crappie. Now, you take your little 16th ounce marabou jig, you fish it for crappie, you know what you're going to catch? Pretty much everything: bass, walleye, perch, you name it, everything pretty much eats the marabou jig. And that has to do with how they look in the water. They give off a presentation that looks very lifelike to a minnow and a small bait fish. They look like leech in the water. They just are very natural, fluid moving baits that don't require much attention from the angler to get bit. You go a little bit bigger, like I just showed you, you got a little bit larger size marabou jigs for smallmouth. That's kind of was a secret for a while. At this point, the cat's out of the bag. They are absolutely deadly on smallmouth in cold water situations. The walleye world, we're seeing the exact same thing where you've got custom jigs like these that are being tied. These are from my local tackle shop, Taps and Tackle. They tie these directly and they sell these, I mean, literally by the thousands to anglers all over Wisconsin. These are custom made jigs, priced well, just dominating jigs for walleyes. You go a little bit bigger and you start talking about some of your bigger largemouth lures like the Prayer Jig by Cumberland. You've also got the Special FX Hair Jig by Picasso, a bunch of other ones out there. These are much bigger, kind of trying to mimic some of your larger shad, your gizzard shads. And then you can go all the way up into the muskie and pike world and you start looking at the exact same things, only much larger sizes. And the reality is they work for all species. You start looking at a bunch of the fly fishing world and you got the giant streamers all the way down to mini tiny streamers and they're made with these materials, whether it's marabou or bucktail or hare or rabbit. A lot of your natural, even some of your synthetic things that are made to look like hair and feathers are very, very good in terms of generating bites. So, it's surprising to me that we don't see more of it used in the fishing world. But when you start looking at the price point, it's so hard to produce at a cost efficient level and at a mass produced level. Like it's hard to produce quantity. So it's not surprising not to see more companies making them, but it is surprising because of how effective they are. It's pretty it's pretty cool to see how good a hair jig can be when fished against other baits that, kind of are used for that same sort of technique. So if you're fishing shallow hair jigs, really light hair jigs, you start talking about people that are fishing swim baits, and a hair jig oftentimes will outproduce a swim jig. If you start looking at some of your deeper ledge stuff where guys might be throwing a football jig or a deep crankbait, your deeper, heavier hair jigs can outproduce that stuff by an amazing amount at times. There's something special about hair and marabou that generates strikes that the fish have a hard time denying. And it's not just, like I said, not just bass, it's all species of game fish. Everything eats it, everything finds it very natural, which again is somewhat interesting to me because when I see it in the water, sometimes I'm like, man, that just doesn't look right or it doesn't look good, especially when you start talking about like bucktail jigs. Bucktail hair is much coarser and doesn't flow like marabou, but man, it gets bit. And I think a lot of it again goes back to forage species aren't always just undulating in the water like we always envision some of our best soft plastics with big flapper legs hanging out all over the place. I think when we start looking at how successful some of your straight-tailed minnow baits are, they really are actually mimicking hair jigs very well in that you might have a little bit of tail movement, but the rest of the bait is pretty much a sleek profiled bait uh, that looks a lot more like a lot of the forage species that the fish are eating. So do not sleep on your hair jigs, especially in cold water. Cold water, they work year round. Cold water periods, in my opinion, are the best time to be throwing your hair jigs. For all species. It just seems like it's something special about it. Just wanted to throw this one out there, guys. It just continues to amaze me how few hair jigs are on the market, but it's really worth trying. I mean, think about the guys who are doing the float and fly technique in the coldest water of the year. They're suspending a little hair jig under a bobber because that gets bit when other things don't get bit. Well, it works all year round. Hair is something you need to have in your tackle box. Just a great baits to use. So let me know in the comment section, what are some of your favorite hair jigs that you guys use on a regular basis? I'd love to hear from you as well. I'm always trying new ones, always trying different ways to work them in to the techniques that I'm out on the water using. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate all the support. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.